The morning sun painted the Wyoming mountains golden as Kate Wilson stepped onto her front porch, coffee cup in hand. She had been living alone on the ranch for almost 3 years now, ever since her father passed away from a fever that swept through the territory. At 28, she had learned to handle everything herself, from fixing broken fence posts to delivering calves in the middle of winter storms. The ranch sat in a valley 20 miles from the nearest town of Cedar Falls. Her closest neighbor, old Mr. Henderson, lived 15 miles east, and she only saw him when he came by to check on her every few months. Most people in town thought she was crazy for staying out here alone, especially the women who whispered behind their hands about how she should find a husband and move to civilization. Kate didn't mind the talk. She preferred the quiet of the mountains to the noise and gossip of town life. Out here, she could be herself without anyone watching her every move or telling her what a proper lady should and shouldn't do. She wore men's work clothes most days, kept her brown hair tied back in a simple braid, and had calluses on her hands from years of hard work. What the townspeople didn't know was that Kate could outshoot any man in the territory. Her father, Captain Robert Wilson, had served in the cavalry before settling down to ranch life. He believed that anyone living on the frontier needed to know how to handle a gun, daughter or not. From the time Kate was 10 years old, he taught her to shoot. With both rifle and pistol, every evening after the chores were done, they would practice behind the barn. First with tin cans lined up on fence posts, then moving to smaller targets as her aim improved. By the time she turned 15, Kate could hit a playing card at 50 paces with her father's old Army Colt. When she turned 18, he gave her a Winchester rifle and taught her to shoot from different positions, standing, kneeling, lying down, even from horseback. Her father always said the same thing during their practice sessions. Kate, the frontier doesn't care if you're a man or woman. A bear won't ask your gender before it attacks. Neither will a rattlesnake or a man with bad intentions. Your ability to protect yourself is what matters out here. Those lessons had served her well over the years. She had faced down wolves threatening her cattle, killed rattlesnakes near the water well, and once shot a mountain lion that had been stalking her horses. Each time, her steady hand and sharp eye had kept her safe. The ranch itself was modest but well maintained. The house was a simple 2-story wooden structure with a wide porch that faced the mountains. Her father had built it to last with thick walls and a stone foundation. Behind the house sat a large barn, a chicken coop, and several smaller outbuildings for storing equipment and hay. Kate ran about 200 head of cattle on the property, mostly hardy breeds that could survive the harsh Wyoming winters. She also kept a small herd of horses, including her favorite Mare, a smart paint horse named Buttercup, who seemed to understand Kate's moods and needs without being told. The work was hard and never-ending. In spring, there were new calves to brand and fences to repair after winter storms. Summer meant moving cattle to higher pastures and cutting hay for winter feed. Fall brought the roundup and preparing for the long cold months ahead. Winter was the hardest time, when she often had to break ice on water troughs and haul hay through snowdrifts to feed hungry cattle. Despite the challenges, Kate loved ranch life. She enjoyed watching the sunrise paint the mountains each morning and seeing the stars fill the clear night sky. She knew every rock and tree on her property, every good watering hole and sheltered spot where cattle liked to gather. The land felt like part of her soul. Money was always tight, but Kate managed to get by. She sold cattle and horses in town when she needed cash and sometimes took in work breaking horses for other ranchers. Her father had taught her that skill too, showing her how to read a horse's personality and work with its nature instead of against it. The people in Cedar Falls had mixed feelings about Kate. Some respected her determination and hard work. Others thought she was stubborn and foolish for refusing the marriage proposals that came her way. The local banker, Mr. Thompson, had been trying to convince her to sell the ranch for 2 years, claiming it was too much work for a woman alone. Kate always politely declined his offers. She knew Thompson wanted the land because it sat on one of the best water sources in the valley. Her father had chosen the location carefully, and she wasn't about to give up the advantage of reliable water just because some banker thought she couldn't handle ranch work. The truth was, Kate had proven herself capable time and again. When her cattle got loose during a storm, she rounded them up herself. When the roof leaked, she climbed up and fixed it. When a horse went lame, she knew how to treat it. She had learned from the best teacher possible, her father, who never treated her differently because she was a girl. Her shooting skills remained her best-kept secret. In town, she was careful to act like most women were expected to act, polite, quiet, and dependent on men for protection. She never mentioned her daily target practice or the fact that she could draw and fire faster than most men could even think about reaching for their guns. This morning felt like any other as Kate finished her coffee and planned her day. She needed to check on the cattle in the north pasture and repair a section of fence near the creek. The weather was perfect for outside work, clear skies and a gentle breeze that kept the summer heat bearable. She went inside to change into her work clothes and strap on her gun belt. The weight of the Colt on her hip was as familiar as breathing. She never went anywhere on the ranch without it, a habit her father had drilled into her from an early age. Better to have it and not need it than need it and not have it, he used to say. As Kate saddled Buttercup and rode out to start her day, she had no idea that 3 desperate men were riding hard across the territory, looking for a place to hide. She didn't know that her quiet, peaceful life was about to be turned upside down by events that started with a bank robbery in the town of Laramie. 2 days' ride to the south, the morning sun climbed higher as Kate worked, unaware that before the week was over, she would have to use every skill her father had taught her to survive an encounter that would test her courage, her shooting ability, and her determination to protect the home she loved. The morning started like any other in the busy town of Laramie. People walked along the wooden sidewalks, heading to work or running errands. Store owners swept their front steps and arranged merchandise in their windows. Children played in the dusty streets while their mothers hung laundry on lines behind their houses. At the First National Bank of Laramie, manager William Hayes unlocked the heavy front door at exactly 9 o'clock. Just like he had every weekday for the past 12 years, he was a careful man who believed in routine and order. The bank vault held nearly $8,000 in gold coins and paper money, more than usual because the railroad company had made a large deposit the day before. 3 miles outside town, 3 men sat on their horses watching the morning activity through a spyglass. Jack Murphy was the leader of the group, a tall man with dark hair and cold blue eyes. He had been planning this job for weeks, studying the bank's routine and the movement of people in town. Next to him sat Pete Collins, a stocky man with a jagged scar running down his left cheek from an old knife fight. Pete was quick with a gun but had a bad temper that often got him into trouble. The third man was young Tommy Barnes, barely 21, who had fallen in with the wrong crowd. After his family lost their farm to debt, Jack had convinced the other 2 that robbing the Laramie Bank would be easy money. Small-town banks didn't have much security, he argued, and they could be miles away before anyone organized a proper chase. What he didn't mention was that he owed money to some dangerous people in Denver, and this robbery was his only way to pay them back before they came looking for him. The 3 men had been planning their escape route for days. They would ride north into the wilderness, where they knew the territory better than any town posse. Jack had spent 2 years working as a guide for hunting parties in those mountains, and he was confident they could disappear into the rough country where lawmen on horseback couldn't follow. As the morning progressed, they watched and waited for the right moment. Jack wanted to hit the bank around 10:30, when most people would be busy with their daily activities and less likely to notice 3 strangers riding into town. At exactly 10:25, the 3 men rode slowly down Laramie's main street. They tried to look casual, like cowboys coming to town for supplies. Jack had told them to keep their faces relaxed and avoid making eye contact with anyone. The plan was simple: get in, take the money, and get out as quickly as possible. They tied their horses to the hitching post outside the bank and checked their weapons one final time. Each man carried a pistol, and Jack had a rifle strapped to his saddle. They had agreed that violence should be avoided if possible, but they were prepared to fight if cornered. Inside the bank, Manager Hayes was helping an elderly farmer deposit money from a cattle sale. The only other person present was young clerk David Miller, who was updating account ledgers at his desk near the window. Neither man paid much attention. When the three strangers walked through the front door, Jack approached the counter with what he hoped looked like a friendly smile. "Good morning," he said to Hayes. "I'd like to make a withdrawal." Hayes looked up from his paperwork. "Certainly, sir. Do you have an account with us?" Instead of answering, Jack pulled out his pistol and pointed it at the startled banker. "I want to make a withdrawal from your vault," he said quietly. "All of it." The elderly farmer gasped and stepped back against the wall. Young David Miller started to stand up from his desk, but Pete quickly moved to cover him with his own gun. "Just stay calm, old-timer," Pete growled. "Nobody has to get hurt here." Tommy positioned himself by the front door to watch for trouble while Jack forced Hayes to open the vault. The banker's hands shook as he worked the combination, fumbling with the numbers twice before getting it right. Inside the vault, bags of gold coins sat next to stacks of paper money bound with rubber bands. Everything was going according to plan until Deputy Sheriff Richard Stone happened to walk past the bank window. David Miller, seeing the lawman, made a desperate decision to try to alert him. He suddenly jumped up and shouted, "Help! We're being robbed!" The situation exploded into chaos. Deputy Stone immediately drew his weapon and kicked open the bank door. Pete spun around and fired, his bullet catching the deputy in the shoulder and spinning him backward. Stone managed to get off one shot before falling, his bullet shattering the front window. The gunshots brought people running from all directions. Another deputy, hearing the commotion, came running down the street with his gun drawn. Jack realized their careful plan had fallen apart, and now they were in a fight for their lives. "Get the money!" Jack shouted to Tommy while returning fire at the second deputy. Tommy grabbed what he could from the vault: 3 bags of gold and several bundles of paper money. It wasn't everything, but it was enough to make them rich if they could escape alive. Pete was still shooting at anyone who appeared in the doorway. His wild firing hit an innocent bystander, a shopkeeper who had come out to see what was happening. The man fell with a bullet in his leg, adding to the chaos and panic in the street. The 3 robbers fought their way out of the bank, using the confusion to reach their horses. Deputy Stone was bleeding heavily from his shoulder wound, unable to continue the fight. The second deputy took cover behind a water trough and kept shooting, but his position gave the outlaws the chance they needed. Jack, Pete, and Tommy mounted their horses and spurred them hard, racing out of town as fast as they could ride. Behind them, more men were grabbing weapons and preparing to give chase. They had gotten away with about $6,000, but they had also shot a lawman and wounded an innocent man. As they rode north toward the mountains, Jack knew their troubles were just beginning. Shooting a deputy would bring every lawman in the territory after them. They would need to find a place to hide and wait for the heat to die down before they could safely leave the area. The 3 men pushed their horses hard for the first hour, putting distance between themselves and Laramie. They followed game trails and creek beds, trying to avoid leaving obvious tracks. Jack's knowledge of the country served them well as he led them through rough terrain where pursuing horses would have trouble following. By evening, they had covered nearly 30 miles, but their horses were exhausted and they were running low on water. They needed to find shelter for the night and plan their next move. That's when Jack spotted smoke rising from a chimney in the distance, a small ranch house sitting alone in a valley. "Perfect," Jack said, pointing toward the smoke. "Looks like someone's home to provide us with food and shelter." The 3 tired, desperate men rode toward Kate Wilson's ranch, confident that whoever lived there would be easy to handle. After all, what kind of threat could one lonely ranch family pose to 3 armed men with nothing left to lose? Kate was washing dishes in her kitchen when she heard the sound of horses approaching. Living alone on a remote ranch, she had learned to pay attention to every unusual sound. Visitors were rare, and unannounced visitors in the evening were almost unheard of. She dried her hands on a dish towel and moved to the front window, carefully pushing aside the curtain to look outside. 3 men on horseback were riding slowly toward her house. Even in the fading light, she could see they looked tired and dusty, like they had been riding hard for a long time. Something about the way they sat in their saddles made Kate uneasy. Her father had taught her to read people's body language, and these men moved like they were alert and dangerous. They kept looking around, studying the ranch buildings and checking for other people. Kate stepped away from the window and walked to the gun cabinet her father had built into the kitchen wall. Inside hung her Winchester rifle and her father's army pistol. She considered strapping on the gun belt, but decided that might make the visitors suspicious if they were just travelers looking for help. Instead, she left the pistol in the cabinet, but made sure it was loaded and ready. She also checked that the rifle was loaded and leaning against the wall within easy reach. Her father's training kicked in as she prepared for whatever was about to happen. The three men rode up to the front porch and dismounted. Kate noticed they tied their horses loosely, as if they might need to leave quickly. Their clothes were dusty, and their faces were covered with several days' worth of stubble. The tall one seemed to be the leader, while the stocky man with the scar kept looking around nervously. Kate took a deep breath and opened the front door before they could knock. She wanted to appear confident and unafraid, even though her heart was beating faster than normal. "Good evening, gentlemen," she said in her most polite voice. "Can I help you with something?" Jack Murphy removed his hat and put on his most charming smile. "Evening, ma'am. Sorry to bother you so late, but we've been riding all day and our horses are pretty tired. We were wondering if you might have some water for them and maybe a place to rest for the night." Kate studied the three men carefully. The leader seemed polite enough, but there was something cold about his eyes. The scarred man kept fidgeting with his gun belt, and the youngest one wouldn't meet her gaze. Every instinct she had developed from years of frontier living was telling her these men were dangerous. "I'm afraid I don't usually take in strangers," Kate replied carefully. "The town of Cedar Falls is only about 20 miles east. You could probably make it there before too late if you pushed your horses a bit." Pete Collins spoke up, his voice rougher than Jack's. 20 miles is a long way for tired horses, lady. We're not asking for much, just some water and a place to sleep. We can pay you for your trouble." The mention of payment made Kate even more suspicious. Honest travelers usually offered to work for their keep, not pay cash. Men with ready money, who looked like they had been riding hard for days, raised red flags in her mind. "I appreciate the offer," Kate said, "but I live alone here, and I make it a policy not to entertain strangers overnight. There's a stream about half a mile down the road where you can water your horses." Jack's friendly expression began to slip. He hadn't expected resistance from a lone woman, and he was getting impatient. They needed a place to hide, and this isolated ranch was perfect for their purposes. "Ma'am," Jack said, his voice taking on a harder edge, "we've been riding for 2 days straight. Our horses are done in, and frankly, so are we. We're not asking permission anymore. We're telling you we're staying the night." Kate felt a chill run down her spine. The polite mask had dropped, and now she could see the real nature of these men. She was facing 3 armed strangers who had just threatened her in her own home. "I think you gentlemen need to leave," Kate said firmly, though her hand moved casually toward the doorframe where she could grab the rifle if needed. "Right now." Tommy Barnes, who had been quiet until now, laughed nervously. "Come on, lady. Don't make this harder than it has to be. We just need a place to rest up for a day or two. You cook us some meals, let us sleep in your barn, and nobody gets hurt." The phrase "nobody gets hurt" confirmed Kate's worst fears. These weren't just tired travelers, they were men running from something, probably the law. And they had just threatened her life if she didn't cooperate. Kate's mind raced as she calculated her options. She was outnumbered 3-1, and they were all armed. But she had advantages they didn't know about. She knew every inch of her property, and she had weapons hidden throughout the house and barn. Most importantly, they had no idea she could outshoot any of them. "Well," Kate said, forcing herself to sound defeated, "I suppose I don't have much choice, do I?" Jack's cold smile returned. "Now you're being smart. We'll put our horses in your barn and settle in for the night. You can cook us some dinner and show us where we can sleep." Pete added, and don't get any ideas about running off to get help. The closest neighbor is miles away, and we'd catch you long before you got there. Kate nodded submissively, playing the role of a frightened woman who had given up. Inside, though, she was already planning her strategy. These men had made a fatal mistake. They had underestimated her because she was a woman alone. As the three outlaws led their horses toward the barn, Kate retreated into her house. She had work to do before they came back expecting dinner. First, she needed to get her hands on more weapons and ammunition. Second, she had to figure out exactly who these men were and what they were running from. She moved quickly through the house, gathering supplies and weapons. Her father's voice seemed to echo in her memory. When you're outnumbered and outgunned, Kate, you have to be smarter than your enemies. Use every advantage you have and never let them see what you're really capable of until it's too late. Kate checked the loads in her pistol and rifle, then hid extra ammunition where she could reach it quickly. She also grabbed her father's field glasses from the shelf. If she was going to survive the next few days, she would need to know exactly what these men were planning. Through the kitchen window, she watched the three strangers unsaddling their horses and looking around her property like they owned it. The way they moved and talked to each other told her they were used to violence and wouldn't hesitate to kill her if she became a problem. But Kate Wilson had been raised on the frontier by a man who believed preparation and skill could overcome any odds. These three dangerous men had chosen the wrong ranch to invade. They were about to discover that the quiet woman they thought would be an easy victim was actually the most dangerous opponent they had ever faced. As Kate began preparing dinner for her unwelcome guests, she was already planning how to turn the tables on them. The game was about to begin, and she intended to win. Kate set the table for 4 people, her hands steady despite the danger she was facing. She had cooked a simple meal of beef stew, cornbread, and coffee using ingredients she could prepare quickly while keeping her ears open for any sounds. From the barn where the 3 men were settling their horses, the kitchen window, she watched them examining her property with the eyes of men who were planning to stay for more than one night. They looked at the layout of the buildings, checked the approaches to the house, and tested the locks on the barn doors. These were not the actions of simple travelers seeking shelter. When the men knocked on her front door, Kate wiped her hands on her apron and went to let them in. She had spent the last hour practicing her role as a frightened, helpless woman who was completely at their mercy. "Come in, gentlemen," she said, stepping aside to let them enter. "Dinner is ready." The 3 men walked into her home like they owned it, tracking mud across her clean floors and looking around with obvious interest. Jack Murphy seemed to be cataloging everything of value, while Pete Collins went straight to the window to check the view of the surrounding area. "Nice place you have here," Jack said, though his tone suggested he was already thinking of it as his place. "You've been living out here alone long?" "Since my father died 3 years ago," Kate replied, which was close enough to the truth. She wanted them to think she was completely isolated and helpless. Tommy Barnes wandered over to examine the photographs on her mantelpiece. One showed Kate with her father, both of them holding rifles after a successful hunting trip. But Tommy was too focused on other things to pay much attention to the details. "Your husband away on business?" Pete asked, his scarred face twisted into what might have been a smile. "I'm not married," Kate said quietly. "Haven't found the right man yet?" The 3 outlaws exchanged glances that made Kate's skin crawl. She could see them thinking that a lone woman with no family nearby would be easy to handle and even easier to eliminate. When they were ready to move on, they sat down at her dinner table without waiting to be invited. Kate served the food, playing the role of a nervous hostess who was trying to please dangerous guests. She listened carefully to their conversation, hoping to learn more about who they were and what they were running from. As the meal progressed, the men began to relax and talk more freely. Tommy was the first to let his guard down, especially after Jack produced a bottle of whiskey from his saddlebags and began pouring drinks. "This is a lot better than sleeping on the ground," Tommy said, taking a large gulp of whiskey. "We've been riding hard for 2 days straight. Pete jabbed him with his elbow. "Shut up, kid." But the whiskey was already loosening Tommy's tongue. "What's the harm in talking? She's just one woman out here in the middle of nowhere. It's not like she can cause us any trouble." Kate continued serving food and refilling coffee cups, acting like she wasn't paying attention to their conversation. But she was memorizing every word, building a picture of who these men were and what they had done. "Well," Tommy continued, emboldened by the alcohol, "I still can't believe how easy that bank job was. Walking in there bold as brass and just taking all that money." Jack's face darkened. "I told you to keep your mouth shut about that." But Pete was also feeling the effects of the whiskey. "Relax, Jack. What's she going to do, ride 20 miles to tell the sheriff?" He laughed harshly. "Besides, after tomorrow, it won't matter what she knows." Kate felt ice form in her stomach. The meaning behind Pete's words was clear. They were planning to kill her before they left. She forced herself to keep moving around the table, clearing dishes and acting like a frightened woman who was trying to stay invisible. "That deputy sure looked surprised when I put a bullet in him," Pete continued, apparently enjoying the memory. "Probably thought he was just dealing with some simple cowboys." "You shot a lawman?" Kate asked, allowing real shock to show in her voice. "Had to," Jack said matter-of-factly. "He got in our way during the bank job in Laramie. Sometimes people get hurt when they don't mind their own business." Kate now knew exactly who these men were, bank robbers who had shot a deputy sheriff. That meant there was probably a posse looking for them, which explained why they were so eager to find a place to hide. Tommy was getting drunker and more talkative. $8,000, he said with a grin. "Split 3 ways, that's enough to keep us comfortable for a long time." "If we can get somewhere safe to spend it," Jack reminded him. "Right now, every lawman in Wyoming is looking for us." Pete leaned back in his chair and studied Kate with eyes that made her feel sick. "Speaking of safe, we're going to need this place for at least a week, maybe longer, until the heat dies down and we can move on." Kate realized they were planning to use her ranch as a hideout for an extended period. And since they had already talked freely about shooting a deputy, they obviously weren't worried about leaving witnesses behind. "I'll do whatever you want," Kate said, putting fear into her voice. "I won't cause any trouble." "Course you won't," Pete said with an ugly laugh. "You're a smart woman. You know what happens to people who cause trouble for men like us?" Jack stood up from the table and walked to the window, looking out at the darkening landscape. "This place is perfect," he said. "Isolated, good water, plenty of supplies. And the best part is, nobody will think to look for us here." Kate began clearing the last of the dishes, her mind racing. She now knew these men were desperate fugitives who had shot a lawman and stolen $8,000. They planned to use her ranch as a hideout, and they had already decided to kill her when they were ready to leave, but they had made several crucial mistakes. First, they had underestimated her completely, seeing only a helpless woman instead of someone who had been trained to survive on the frontier. Second, they had told her too much about their crimes, giving her information she could use against them. And third, they had no idea that the quiet woman serving them dinner could outshoot any of them. As Kate washed dishes and listened to the men continue drinking and talking, she began planning her strategy. She knew exactly where they had bedded down their horses, what weapons they carried, and how they planned to use her property. Most importantly, she knew they felt completely safe and superior. "We'll sleep in the barn tonight," Jack announced. "Tomorrow we'll get a better look at this place and decide how to set up our camp." "What about her?" Tommy asked, nodding toward Kate. "She stay in the house and cook our meals," Jack said. "And she remember what happened to that deputy. If she gets any ideas about being a hero." Kate nodded submissively, but inside she was anything but submissive. These men had invaded her home, threatened her life, and planned to murder her. They thought they had found an easy victim, but they were about to discover they had made the biggest mistake of their criminal careers. As the 3 outlaws headed out to the barn for the night, Kate began her own preparations. Tomorrow would bring the first test of the skills her father had spent years teaching her. She intended to pass that test and make sure these dangerous men never threatened anyone else again. Kate didn't sleep a single minute that night. She sat in her kitchen chair with her father's Winchester rifle across her knees, watching the barn through the window and planning her next move. The three outlaws had settled in for the night, confident that their helpless hostess would cause them no trouble. She had spent hours thinking through every detail of her situation. 3 armed men against 1 woman, but they didn't know she could shoot. They were experienced criminals, but they had never faced anyone like her. Most importantly, they thought they were safe and in control. Kate knew that her only chance was to turn their confidence against them. She had to strike first, strike hard, and strike when they least expected it. Her father had always told her that in a gunfight, the person who hesitated was the person who died as the first pale light of dawn began to show over the mountains. Kate made her final preparations. She checked her rifle one more time, making sure it was loaded and ready. She also strapped her father's army pistol around her waist, hidden under her long coat. If things went bad, she wanted to have a backup weapon ready, moving quietly through. Her house? Kate positioned supplies where she could reach them quickly. Extra ammunition went behind furniture and in corners where she could grab it during a fight. She also filled several water containers and placed them around the house. If this turned into a long standoff, she would need water. The most important part of her plan was choosing the right position for her first strike. Kate had grown up on this ranch and knew every building, every corner, every sightline. After careful consideration, she decided the barn loft would give her the best advantage. From the loft, she could see the entire ranch yard and control access to the water well, the horse corral, and the main approach to her house. It was also a position the outlaws wouldn't expect. They thought she was just a frightened woman who would stay hidden in her house. As the sun climbed higher, Kate saw smoke beginning to rise from the small fire the men had built in the barn. They would be waking up soon, probably expecting breakfast and planning their next move. This was her chance to get into position before they started moving around. Kate slipped out the back door of her house and made her way carefully toward the barn. She had walked this path thousands of times and knew exactly where to step to avoid making noise. The morning air was cold and still. Perfect conditions for accurate shooting. The barn had a ladder built into the back wall that led up to the loft where hay was stored. Kate climbed quietly, testing each rung before putting her full weight on it. Her father had built this ladder to last, and it didn't creak or groan under her weight. Once in the loft, Kate positioned herself behind a pile of hay bales that would give her cover while allowing her to see the entire ranch yard. She had a clear view of the barn door where the men would emerge, as well as the area around the water well and horse corral. Kate checked her rifle one final time and settled in to wait. Her heart was beating fast, but her hands were steady. This was what her father had trained her for, the moment when all those hours of practice would mean the difference between life and death. She didn't have to wait long. The barn door opened, and Jack Murphy stepped out, stretching and looking around the ranch yard. He moved with the casual confidence of a man who believed he was in complete control of the situation. Kate aimed carefully and called out in a loud, clear voice, "You men need to saddle your horses and ride out of here right now. This is your only warning." Jack spun around, trying to locate where the voice was coming from. His hand moved toward his gun, but he stopped when he couldn't see any target to shoot at. "Who's that?" he shouted back. "Where are you?" Kate's answer was a rifle shot that knocked Jack's hat clean off his head. The bullet passed so close to his skull that he could feel the wind from it. He dove for cover behind a water trough, his face white with shock. "The next shot won't miss," Kate called out. "Get your friends and get off my property." Inside the barn, Pete and Tommy had heard the shot and were scrambling for their weapons. Pete appeared in the doorway with his pistol drawn, looking around wildly for something to shoot at. Kate's second shot shattered Pete's gun hand before he could get off a single round. The scarred outlaw screamed in pain and dropped his weapon, blood streaming from his wounded fingers. Tommy tried to rush out of the barn, but Kate's third shot kicked up dirt at his feet and sent him scrambling back into the building. Now all Three men were trapped inside the barn, suddenly realizing they were facing someone who could shoot better than anyone they had ever encountered. "What do you want?" Jack shouted from behind the water trough. "I want you off my land," Kate replied. "You've got 1 minute to think about it before I start shooting to kill instead of just making points." The three outlaws huddled inside the barn, trying to figure out what had gone wrong with their perfect plan. Pete was wrapping his wounded hand with a piece of cloth, cursing steadily under his breath. "How is one woman doing this to us?" Tommy asked, his voice shaking with fear and confusion. "Shut up and let me think," Jack snapped. He was trying to locate Kate's position by the sound of her voice, but the echo off the barn walls made it impossible to pinpoint exactly where she was. "Hiding." Kate called out again. "Time's up. You had your chance to leave peacefully." Her next shot hit the water bucket sitting next to Pete, sending water splashing in all directions and proving that she could hit whatever she aimed at. The men realized they were dealing with someone who had skills they hadn't expected. "Listen," Jack shouted, "we can work this out. We've got money, we can pay you to let us stay." Kate's response was another perfectly placed shot that splintered the barn door frame inches from Tommy's head. "I don't want your stolen money," she called back. "I want you gone." Pete, still bleeding from his wounded hand, was getting angry. "She's just one woman. We can rush her if we all go at once." "Go ahead and try," Kate said, loud enough for them to hear. "I've got plenty of ammunition and all day to use it." To prove her point, she fired 3 quick shots that hit the barn door in a tight pattern no bigger than a man's hand. The precision. Shooting left no doubt that she could hit anything she wanted to hit. Jack was beginning to understand that they had made a terrible mistake. The quiet ranchwoman they thought would be easy to handle was actually the most dangerous opponent he had ever faced. She had position, skill, and clearly wasn't afraid to use her weapons. "What do you want us to do?" he finally called out. "Drop your weapons and walk away from the barn with your hands up," Kate replied. "Do it now, or the next shot goes through somebody instead of past them." The three men looked at each other, realizing their situation had completely reversed. Instead of being the hunters, they had become the hunted. The woman they had planned to intimidate and eventually kill was now holding them prisoner with nothing but her superior shooting skills. Kate waited in the loft, her rifle ready and her nerves steady. She had taken the first step in defending her home and her life. But she knew this was just the beginning. These men were desperate and dangerous, and they wouldn't give up easily. The real test was still to come. The standoff had been going on for over an hour. Kate remained hidden in the barn loft, her rifle trained on the barn entrance where the three outlaws were trapped. Pete Collins was still bleeding from his wounded gun hand, and all three men were beginning to realize they had seriously underestimated the woman they thought would be an easy victim. Jack Murphy tried to take charge of the situation. He had been in tight spots before and usually managed to find a way out through violence or intimidation. But this was different. He couldn't see his enemy, couldn't threaten her, and couldn't get close enough to use his weapons effectively. "Listen, lady," Jack called out, "you can't stay up there forever. Eventually you'll have to come down, and when you do, we'll be waiting." Kate's response was a rifle shot that split the wooden beam right next to Jack's head. Splinters of wood flew in all directions, and one piece cut his cheek. The message was clear. She could hit him any time she wanted. "I can stay here as long as I need to," Kate replied calmly. "Question is, how long can you three stay in that barn without water, food, or medical care for your friend's hand?" Pete looked down at his wounded hand, which was still bleeding despite the makeshift bandage. The bullet had shattered 2 of his fingers, and without proper medical attention, infection would set in within a day or two. Tommy Barnes was getting more nervous by the minute. He was the youngest of the 3 and had never been in a situation like this before. "Maybe we should just give up," he whispered to the others. "She's got us pinned down, and Pete needs a doctor." "Nobody's given up," Jack hissed back. "We just need to think of a way to get close to her." But Kate wasn't giving them time to think. She had decided to keep pressure on them, making their situation worse by the hour. Her next target was their supplies and equipment. From her position in the loft, Kate could see the outlaws' saddlebags piled near their horses. Those bags contained their food, water, ammunition, and the stolen money from the bank robbery. If she could destroy or scatter their supplies, they would become even more desperate. Kate aimed carefully and put a bullet through one of their water containers. The precious liquid spilled out onto the barn floor, wasted. Her second shot hit their bag of coffee, sending brown powder flying in all directions. "Stop that!" Jack shouted angrily. "You're destroying our supplies." "That's the idea," Kate called back. "Every minute you stay on my property, your situation gets worse." She proved her point by shooting holes in their remaining water containers and food supplies. The three men watched helplessly as their resources disappeared one bullet at a time. Pete was getting desperate. His hand was throbbing with pain, and he was starting to feel lightheaded from blood loss. "We have to do something," he told Jack. "I need medical attention, and she's picking us apart piece by piece." Jack studied the layout of the ranch yard, looking for any way to reach Kate's position or at least get close enough to return fire effectively. The problem was that she had chosen her spot perfectly. She could see everything while remaining hidden from view. "Tommy," Jack whispered, "I want you to create a distraction. Run out the side door and try to draw her fire. While she's shooting at you, Pete and I will rush her position." Tommy's face went pale. "You want me to be the target?" "She hasn't missed a shot yet." "Just run fast and zigzag," Jack said. "She can't hit a moving target." But Kate had been listening to their whispered conversation from her position above them. The barn's acoustics carried their voices right up to the loft, giving her advance warning of their plan when Tommy burst out of the side door and began running toward the house. Kate was ready for him. Her first shot kicked up dirt right in front of his feet, causing him to stumble and fall. Her second shot passed so close to his head that he could hear the bullet whistle past his ear. Tommy scrambled back toward the barn on his hands and knees, all thoughts of being a hero forgotten. Jack and Pete had started to move during the distraction, but Kate's rapid shooting forced them back into cover as well. "Nice try," Kate called out. "Anyone else want to test how fast I can shoot?" The failed escape attempt left the three outlaws in an even worse position. They now knew that Kate could track multiple targets and switch between them faster than they could move. Their confidence was completely shattered. As the day wore on, Kate continued her systematic destruction of their supplies and equipment. She shot holes in their saddles, making them unusable. She destroyed their extra ammunition by hitting the containers and scattering bullets across the barn floor. She even shot the handles off their coffee pot and cooking utensils. Each shot was precisely placed to cause maximum damage while proving that she was in complete control of the situation. The three men could only watch as their resources disappeared and their chances of escape grew smaller. By afternoon, Pete was running a fever from his infected wound. The bandage on his hand was soaked with blood and pus, and he was having trouble staying conscious. Tommy was so nervous he couldn't stop shaking, and Jack was running out of ideas. "This is crazy," Tommy whispered. "We're bank robbers, not farmers. We don't know how to fight someone like this." Jack had to admit the kid was right. They were used to quick jobs in town where they could intimidate people and escape before anyone organized resistance. This kind of prolonged siege was something they had never faced before. Kate, meanwhile, was completely in her element. She had grown up on the frontier where survival meant being prepared for anything. Her father's training had covered exactly this kind of situation, being outnumbered but having the advantage of position and superior marksmanship. She also knew the psychological pressure was working on the outlaws. Men like these were used to being in control, used to having people fear them. Being trapped and helpless was breaking down their confidence and making them more likely to make mistakes. As the sun began to set, Kate called out to them again. "Last chance, gentlemen. Throw out your weapons and surrender, or spend another night in that barn without water or medical care." Pete was barely conscious now, leaning against the barn wall and mumbling incoherently. His infection was spreading, and without treatment, he would be dead within days. Jack looked at his wounded partner and then at young Tommy, who was practically in tears from fear and exhaustion. He realized that the quiet ranch woman had outmaneuvered them completely. She was winning this fight without even showing herself, But Jack Murphy was too proud and too desperate to give up. He still had the stolen money, and he still had his gun. Somehow, some way, he was going to find a method to turn this situation around. He just didn't know that Kate was already planning her next move, one that would end this standoff once and for all. The second day of the siege began with Pete Collins barely clinging to consciousness. His wounded hand had swollen to twice its normal size, and angry red streaks were running up his arm. The infection was spreading through his bloodstream, and everyone could see he was dying. Jack Murphy paced back and forth in the cramped barn like a caged animal. The stolen money sat in his saddlebags, useless to him as long as they were trapped by one woman with a rifle. His carefully planned escape had turned into a nightmare, and he was running out of options. Tommy Barnes sat in the corner, staring at his wounded partner with wide, frightened eyes. He had joined up with Jack thinking bank robbery would be easy. Money, but now he was trapped in a barn, watching a man die while a mysterious woman picked them apart shot by shot. Kate remained in the barn loft, patient and alert. She had gotten a few hours of sleep during the night, taking turns between watching the barn entrance and resting. Her father had taught her that stamina was just as important as marksmanship in a long fight. She could hear the outlaws talking below, their voices carrying clearly in the morning air. Pete's condition was getting worse by the hour, and the other two men were starting to panic. "We have to get out of here," Tommy whispered urgently. "Pete's going to die if we don't get him to a doctor soon. You think I don't know that?" Jack snapped back. "But every time we stick our heads out, she puts a bullet right where we were standing." Kate decided it was time to increase the pressure. She aimed carefully and put a bullet through their last water container, sending the precious liquid splashing across the barn floor. "That was your last water," she called out. "How long do you think you can last without it?" Jack's frustration boiled over. "What do you want from us, lady? We can't leave because you'll shoot us, but you won't let us stay either." "I want you to surrender," Kate replied simply. "Drop your weapons and come out with your hands up. Your friend needs medical attention, and this is the only way he's going to get it." But Jack's pride wouldn't let him give up to a woman, even when faced with certain death. Instead, he came up with a desperate plan that would only make their situation worse. "Tommy," he whispered, "I want you to sneak out the back of the barn while I create a distraction. Get to the horses and try to bring them around to the front. If we can mount up quick enough, maybe we can ride out of here before she can stop all three of us." Tommy looked at Pete's feverish face and nodded. He was willing to try anything to get out of this nightmare, but Kate had been listening to their whispered plans from her position in the loft. She knew exactly what they were thinking and was ready to counter their move, when Jack suddenly burst out of the front of the barn, firing wildly at the loft and shouting at the top of his lungs. Kate didn't take the bait. Instead, she tracked the sound of footsteps moving around the back of the building. Tommy had almost reached the horses when Kate's voice rang out from above him. "Stop right there, or the next shot goes through your back." Tommy froze in place, his hand halfway to his horse's reins. He slowly raised his hands and turned around, but Kate remained invisible in the loft. "Walk back to the barn," she commanded, slowly. Jack had stopped shooting when he realized his distraction hadn't worked. He watched in defeat as Tommy walked back to the barn entrance with his hands raised. "Face it, gentlemen," Kate called out. "I can see everything that happens on this ranch. You can't outrun me, you can't outsmart me, and you certainly can't outshoot me." To prove her point, she fired 3 rapid shots that formed a perfect triangle around Jack's feet. The precision shooting left no doubt that she could have killed him if she wanted to. Pete had been listening to the failed escape attempt through his fever-induced haze. Suddenly, he staggered to his feet and stumbled toward the barn entrance. "I can't take this anymore," he mumbled, his infected hand held against his chest. "I'm walking out of here." "Pete, don't be stupid," Jack called after him, but the wounded man was beyond reasoning. Pete appeared in the barn doorway, swaying on his feet and barely able to stand. His face was flushed with fever, and his eyes had a wild, desperate look. "I surrender," he called out weakly. "Please, I need help." Kate could see that the man was dying. Despite everything these outlaws had done, she wasn't going to let someone die from an infected wound if she could help it. "Drop your gun belt and walk toward the house," she instructed. Slowly. Pete fumbled with his gun belt with his good hand, finally managing to unbuckle it and let it fall to the ground. He took 3 steps toward the house before collapsing. Face first in the dirt. Kate faced a difficult decision. Her Christian upbringing told her to help a wounded man, but her survival instincts warned her it could be a trap. After a moment's hesitation, she decided to risk it. "Jack, Tommy," she called out, "if either of you moves while I'm helping your friend, I'll put a bullet in him and then come for you." Kate climbed down from the loft and approached Pete carefully, her rifle ready for instant use. The wounded outlaw was unconscious but still breathing. His infection was so bad she could smell it from several feet away. She dragged Pete away from the barn entrance and into the open where Jack and Tommy couldn't use him as cover. Then she quickly climbed back to her position in the loft, leaving Pete lying in the ranch yard. "Your friend is going to die without medical attention," Kate told the remaining 2 outlaws. "The only way to save him is to surrender and let me tie you up until the law arrives." Jack stared out at his unconscious partner, wrestling with his pride and his desperation. The stolen money meant nothing if they were all dead. But surrendering to a woman felt like the ultimate humiliation for a man who had built his reputation on intimidating others. Tommy made the decision for both of them. He walked out of the barn with his hands raised high above his head. "I give up," he called out. "I don't want to die in this place." Jack found himself alone in the barn, facing a choice between his pride and his life. Outside, Pete was dying and Tommy had surrendered. The woman in the loft had proven she could hit anything she aimed at, and she had the patience to wait him out. For the first time in his criminal career, Jack Murphy realized he had met someone he couldn't intimidate, couldn't outfight, and couldn't escape from. The quiet ranch woman had beaten him using nothing but superior shooting skills and smarter tactics. The sound of approaching horses in the distance made his decision for him. Someone was coming, probably a posse following their trail from Laramie. If he was going to surrender, it was better to give up to the woman who had outfought him than to face a lynch mob. Jack walked slowly out of the barn with his hands raised, finally admitting defeat to the most dangerous opponent he had ever faced. Kate kept her rifle trained on Jack Murphy as he walked out of the barn with his hands raised. Even in surrender, she didn't trust him completely. Men like Jack were dangerous until they were properly secured, and she had learned never to underestimate a desperate criminal. "Drop your gun belt and kick it away," she commanded from her position in the loft. Jack reluctantly unbuckled his weapons and let them fall to the ground. He kicked the gun belt several feet away, his face burning with shame at being defeated by a woman he had thought would be easy prey. Tommy Barnes stood nearby with his hands still raised, looking relieved that the nightmare was finally over. Pete Collins lay unconscious in the dirt, his breathing shallow and labored from the infection that was slowly killing him. The sound of approaching horses grew louder, and soon Kate could see a dust cloud rising from the direction of the main road. The posse from Laramie had finally tracked the outlaws to her ranch. Sheriff William Henderson led the group of 12 armed men who rode into Kate's ranch yard. They had been following the outlaws' trail for 3 days, and Henderson was surprised to find the situation already under control. "Well, I'll be," Henderson said, looking at the 2 surrendered outlaws and the unconscious man lying in the dirt. "Looks like someone beat us to it." Kate climbed down from the barn loft, still carrying her Winchester rifle. The posse members stared in amazement as they realized that a lone woman had captured the dangerous fugitives they had been hunting. "Sheriff Henderson," Kate said, recognizing the lawman from his occasional visits to check on her, "these 3 men robbed the bank in Laramie and shot Deputy Stone. They came to my ranch thinking they could hide out here." Henderson dismounted and walked over to examine the prisoners. He had known Kate since she was a child and was well aware of her father's reputation as a marksman, but even he was impressed by what she had accomplished. "How did you manage to capture all 3 of them?" he asked. Kate gestured toward the barn loft. "I had a good position, and they underestimated what they were dealing with. They thought I'd be easy to intimidate. Deputy Miller, who had ridden with the posse, looked at the scattered supplies and equipment around the barn. Bullet holes marked every surface, showing the precision of Kate's shooting. "Looks like you put on quite a demonstration," Miller said admiringly. Jack Murphy stood, with his head down, unable to meet anyone's eyes. The humiliation of being defeated by a woman was almost worse than the prospect of hanging for his crimes. Tommy Barnes was more talkative, eager to cooperate now that the ordeal was over. "She's the best shot I ever seen," he told the sheriff. "Could put a bullet anywhere she wanted from way up in that loft." Sheriff Henderson knelt beside Pete Collins and checked his pulse. The wounded outlaw was burning with fever and barely breathing. His infected hand had swollen to grotesque proportions. "This man needs medical attention immediately," Henderson said. "Doc Wilson in Cedar Falls might be able to save him if we get him there quick enough." Two of the posse members carefully lifted Pete and placed him in the back of a wagon they had brought for transporting prisoners. His chances of survival were slim, but they would do what they could. Henderson found the stolen money in Jack's saddlebags, nearly $6,000 in gold and paper currency. He counted it carefully and made notes in his official ledger. "There's a $2,000 reward for the capture of these men," Henderson told Kate. "Looks like you've earned yourself a nice payday." Kate had never seen that much money at one time. The reward would allow her to expand her ranch, buy better breeding stock, and maybe even hire some help for the hardest work. As the posse prepared to leave with their prisoners, Henderson pulled Kate aside for a private conversation. "Word of this is going to spread," he warned her. "Every newspaper in the territory will want to interview the woman who single-handedly captured the Laramie bank robbers. Are you ready for that kind of attention?" Kate considered the question carefully. She had always preferred privacy and solitude, but she understood that her actions would make her famous whether she wanted it or not. "I'll deal with whatever comes," she said simply. "My father taught me to handle whatever the frontier throws at me." Henderson nodded approvingly. "He'd be proud of you, Kate. What you did here took more courage and skill than most men could manage." The sheriff's words meant more to Kate than any newspaper story or reward money. Her father had raised her to be strong and capable, and she had proven herself worthy of his training. As the posse rode away with their prisoners, Kate stood in her ranch yard and surveyed the damage. Bullet holes marked the barn walls, and scattered supplies lay everywhere. But her home was safe, and the dangerous men who had threatened her were now in custody. News of Kate's exploits spread across Wyoming territory faster than wildfire. Newspapers as far away as Denver and Salt Lake City ran stories about the sharpshooter of Cedar Falls, who had outgunned 3 bank robbers. Marriage proposals arrived by mail from men she had never met, all claiming they wanted to marry the famous woman who could outshoot any man alive. Kate politely declined them all, preferring her independence to the complications of married life. The reward money allowed her to buy the finest breeding bull in the territory and expand her herd significantly. She also hired 2 reliable ranch hands who respected her abilities and didn't mind working for a woman boss. Pete Collins died of his infection 2 days after reaching town, despite the doctor's best efforts. Jack Murphy and Tommy Barnes were tried for bank robbery and murder. Jack was sentenced to hang, while Tommy received 20 years in the territorial prison. Years later, when Kate was an old woman with gray hair and arthritic hands, children would visit her ranch to hear the story of how she defeated 3 dangerous outlaws with nothing but her rifle and her father's training. She would tell them about the importance of being prepared, of practicing their skills, and of never backing down when they were protecting what mattered to them. Most importantly, she taught them that courage and determination were more important than size or gender when facing life's challenges. Kate Wilson never married, but she lived a full and satisfying life on the ranch her father had built. She became a legend in Wyoming territory, proving that on the frontier, survival belonged to those with the skill and courage to fight for it. The quiet woman who had seemed like an easy target to 3 desperate outlaws had instead become one of the most famous marksmen in the American West. Her story inspired generations of people who learned that Sometimes the most dangerous opponents are the ones who look the least threatening. When Kate finally passed away at the age of 78, the entire territory mourned the loss of a true frontier hero. Her ranch became a landmark, and her story became part of Wyoming folklore, a reminder that true strength comes not from intimidation or violence, but from skill, preparation, and the courage to stand up for what's right.